I'm just going to read an excerpt from the first chapter of my Pan book, which kind of tells an unfolding story about Pan. So for those of you not familiar with Pan, Pan is the horned and goat-footed god of flocks and goats and all of that. All right. With the horns and legs of a goat, but the torso of a man, Pan is a god whose very form confounds the distinction between animal and divine. From his earliest appearances in the written record, Pan has been imagined in ways that are often irreconcilable. Even the stories of his birth and parentage vary widely. According to the Homeric hymn to Pan, which may date from as early as the 5th century BC, when the newborn Pan's nurse first saw his goatish face, shaggy legs, and cloven hooves, she fled in terror, never to return. His father, Hermes, delighted by any sign of mischief, burst out laughing and picked up the strange child at once. He brought him straight to Mount Olympus, where the gods all shared in his mirth and welcomed Pan to their divine company, especially Dionysus. That is how he got his name, the hymn tells us, for the meaning of Pan is all. Other sources are not so sure. The Athenian playwright Aeschylus believed there were two Pans, one whose father was Cronos and one the son of Zeus. An Arcadian tradition identifies Pan's father as Aether, but pagan theologians knew this was just a local name for Cronos, the father of Zeus. It was because he was Zeus's half-brother that Pan was able to fight alongside him during the war with the Titans. As for Pan's mother, she may have been Amalthea, Zeus's wet nurse, who was either a goat or a nymph who was changed into one. It could also have been a nymph, such as Thrymbus or Sose, or perhaps the famous Callisto, who was transformed into a bear by Zeus and set among the stars. Then there's Arcadian Penelope, also known as Dryope, daughter of Dryopos, himself either a mortal or a local oak god from Mount Kyllene, sacred to Pan. This Penelope was the one whose beauty led Hermes to work as a laborer on her father's farm in order to win her hand. Some people confuse her with that other Penelope, Odysseus's wife, and tell a story about her that sounds more like a sailor's yarn than a proper myth. They say she wasn't the patient wife that the Odyssey would have us believe, but slept with all 108 suitors who courted her in Ithaca, while Odysseus made his long way home from the Trojan War. It's no wonder Penelope's child looked more animal than human, given that she couldn't restrain her own bestial appetites. But surely that absurd tale is just an example of the same ancient misogyny that blamed the Trojan War on Helen. If Penelope, wife of Odysseus, was Pan's mother, it was more likely to have been because Hermes visited her in the form of a ram. There's no authorized version of the Greek myths, and most have several variants recorded across the ancient sources, but the multiplicity of accounts surrounding Pan's parentage is remarkable even by Greek standards. His outsider status may explain the conflicting attempts to bring him into the mythology of the dominant Greek pantheon, while the many accounts of his parentage might reflect intensely local cults of Pan in Arcadia itself. Never one of the 12 Olympians, that quarrelsome family headed by Zeus, he was originally worshipped in Arcadia, although his cult would eventually spread throughout southern Greece and beyond. Arcadia is a forested and mountainous region in the center of the southern Peloponnese, with pastures for grazing but little arable farmland. For most ancient Greeks, it was a wilderness whose rough inhabitants seem to have survived from an earlier age. From this perspective, the Arcadians existed midway between a barbaric past and the full civic life typical of other Greek states. They spoke a dialect closer to Mycenaean than to classical Greek, and were regarded as the first Greeks in the Peloponnese. Thought of as older than the moon, Arcadians were hunters and eaters of acorns, suggesting to other Greeks that they were survivors from a time before farming. In fact, the Arcadians did live in settlements surrounded by farms, as did other Greeks, but the difficult landscape meant that they had to seek resources elsewhere. They had a reputation for being formidable warriors, and many sought their fortunes as mercenaries. Arcadians also, and perhaps most famously, herded goats and sheep, a major source of wealth. For his earliest worshippers, Pan acted as sacred guardian of the flocks and presided over the hunt, the Arcadians' other major source of food. Mount Menelos was especially sacred to Pan, and there, according to the 2nd century AD geographer Pausanias, local people still heard him play on his pipes.